Hello, and welcome to the Ground Jewels. My name's James Dixon, and I'm delighted you've joined us this week. This week we'll be talking about Highfield Road, the former home of Coventry City. And it's perhaps the perfect time to be talking about Coventry City, because they're in the FA Cup semi-finals for the first time in a long time. And they're a club very much on the up. Nearly got promoted to the Premier League last season. We're a penalty shootout away from doing so. Having a good season this year, obviously, with the cup run, etc. Top half of the championship. And we have perhaps the perfect guest to discuss Coventry City. We have the football broadcaster Richard Keys. Richard's obviously a very well-known broadcaster, but perhaps a bit less well-known is his Coventry City fandom. I mean, for one, he hasn't had a chance to cover them in a Premier League game for more than 20 years. He is a hardcore fan. Bit of a nerdy fan as well, but not unlike myself, can remember games and goal scorers from very, very long ago, right back to his formative years. And he's someone who obviously clearly has a passion, not just for the club, but for the ground that they used to occupy. I think it's a really interesting chat. We cover the glory years in the late 60s and 70s, their Premier League years as well, which obviously Richard had a keen interest in. Working for Sky at the time, and then some of the struggles since that they've left Highfield Road, and what leaving Highfield Road meant to the club, and the sort of journey that it's been on. I hope you enjoy it. It's a really interesting conversation about a really interesting ground. I will share one nugget which didn't make it into the interview because we were chatting basically before I'd hit record. And I told Richard about the one game that I went to at Highfield Road, which was in, I think, 96, maybe 95. But it was Blackburn Rovers lost 5-0 to Coventry. And I was going as a sort of Blackburn Rovers glory supporter. It was just after they'd won the league. And he had instant recall of the game. He remembered the score. He remembered the kit, because Blackburn were playing in a horrible red and black kit. He remembered that there was an orange ball because it was played in December and there was snow. It was sort of freaky, instant recall of that game. And that's a non-televised game as well. So this is a sort of, fan we're talking about here, proper fan, proper passionate about Coventry. And I think you'll be interested to hear what he has to say about Highfield Road. Today we're joined by a man who's been on our television screens for almost 40 years. He was at the vanguard of satellite broadcasting in the UK, and in 1992 was chosen to front Sky Sports coverage of the brand new Premier League, something he continues to do for beIN Sports. Richard Keys, welcome to the Ground Jewels.
Thank you, my friend, and very nice it is to be here.
And today we're going to talk about Highfield Road, the one-time home of Coventry City, a stadium that was built in 1899, and its construction nearly put Coventry out of business because the club spent so much money on building it that they couldn't afford to play players who went on strike. After the First World War, Coventry were elected to the Football League, but it wasn't until 1967 that First Division football came to Highfield Road, where it would remain for 33 seasons until 2001. And that's just 4 years before the ground was sold and Coventry moved to pastures new. Richard, tell us about your memories of Highfield Road.
Oh, my goodness. I could bore you for a long time. You need to be a Coventry fan and a stadium aficionado, I think, to engage with this. Just as a 4-year-old, I think we traced my first game back to Swansea, Division 3, 60, 63, 62, 63, something of that order. Cop End, Crow's Nest, stand on the far side that burnt down, 51,455 there on the day that we beat Wolves. I think both clubs already promoted, if memory serves me correct, and that was about settling who was going to win the title. Just so much. I mean, it was selfishly one evening taking penalties against Eamon Holmes at the West End for a charity. I got 4, by the way, and the 5th one came off the bar, and I'm convinced to this day it was still in. No, just so many memories. Difficult to some degree during that period that you mentioned in the first division. I used to leave on occasions thinking, I wonder what it's like to support a club that you know when you go to watch them are going to win. Our problem was during that period, if we won 10 games a season, that's enough to keep us up. But getting to that 10-game win mark was always painful, always painful. But great characters, great. I mean, who remembers Noel Campbell getting us into a 6th place finish in, I think, his 2nd year at the club, after Jim had left us, and you know, Gordon Milne's era, players like Tommy Hutch and Colin Steen, and then we seem to have an academy in those days that would just a string of top players: Willie Carr, Dennis Mortimer. I know we bought Gary Gillespie in, but subsequently sold him on. Thompson, Haitley. I mean, so many players that we would have loved, I'm sure, to have seen continue to play for us at Highfield Road over that period, but didn't happen. But as an arena, as a stadium, yeah, and I was there when Elton John closed it. I mean, I at that time I'd got to know Elton vaguely well. I remember wandering out of the sky blue stand, as it was, as he was heading towards the West End stand to start his concert. Oh, what are you doing here? I said, well, strangely, I'm here to watch you. I mean, it was a daft question. What are you doing here? You're here to close our stadium, which he did. The win over Derby, which I couldn't attend. I mean, there's just so much. It was home for so long, and yeah, a big piece of me misses it, but we had to go. I mean, that debate had to go. I mean, well, I say that and look at the pain that we inflicted upon ourselves by getting that wrong. The deal that was done originally, that Brian Richardson somehow managed to renegotiate and cost us the ownership of the new stadium, in effect, gave it away to the City Council and the Derek Higgs Trust, and the disaster that became over a long period of time trying to. I told you I could bore you. I mean, how much do you want?
Basically anticipating all of my questions, though, so it might just be a monologue rather than a podcast. Let's take you back to that time, because I know you mentioned your first game, but let's take you back to the city of Coventry. You were born in the late 50s, and at the time, Coventry was a really booming city.
Yes.
I think because of how much it had suffered during the Second World War, it was one of the first cities to sort of experience a planned regeneration, and you can see that with the cathedral and a lot of the architecture, some of it not having dated all of that well. And the automotive trade was booming. You know, what's your memories of the city as a youngster?
It's funny, you know, with how much of it is something you remember and how much that you subsequently have seen that you think you might have remembered. I mean, the pictures of the boys celebrating at the Hotel Learfrick, as I think the Cup winners did, the night that we got promotion, and I remember a TV report saying the boom city of Coventry now has a team to match. You know, and we were in the 60s. We were a city that was making an impact. I'd never seen Coventry as, you know, a small city or a small club. I mean, I think when I grew up, we were the 7th biggest city in the UK, and we needed a team to match that. And Jimmy Hill subsequently delivered it in at the end of an extraordinary period of time. I mean, it was remarkable. I'm still in touch with Gouldy these days. Bobby Gould, who was a central character in that team, 24 goals that season, and I was there to see most of them. And I was like every other young lad at the time, you know. You'd take your stool, you were at the front. But in those days, Jimmy Hill provided entertainment. You could go at 1 o'clock, 1:30, and be entertained pre-match by all sorts of displays, and you know that was all part of going to Coventry. We were the first all-seater stadium in the UK. It wasn't a very tidy regeneration of our ground, but at least we can claim to have been so. Again, Jimmy back as chairman this time, you know, driving change through, and he was right. That's the way ultimately that it went. our version of it wasn't necessarily very impressive, with seats out, with no covers. My goodness, it wasn't great, but you know, he did the right thing. He did this, so. But yeah, as a city, enormously proud of my city then, now, and I've never given up on the love. I mean, going down to Division Two was League Two. That was painful. We the lost decade, I refer to it as, because it needn't have happened. But then along comes King Mark, and wow, what a job he's done in a different time and a different place, but a similar story to the one that Jimmy Hill unveiled for us. All of a sudden, with Derek Robbins and chairman of Banbury Buildings, we started building new stands, sky blue stand on that side, and then the new stand on this side. After that one burnt down, that old wooden stadium that we had on that side. The timing was unfortunate, but very fortunate in some way, because we got a brand new stand for a brand new season in League One. But full of memory. You can be nostalgic, and we're being so. But as I say, everything's got to change. We couldn't continue to be a. Well, I mean, how much difference did it make in the end? The plan was we would be a Premier League team and play in an arena like that. That it was going to be an Olympic stadium, wasn't it? I mean, lots of grandiose ideas. The first one, pitch comes out with a roof on it. We wouldn't be anywhere near that.
For people, there was when there was a competition to replace the new Wembley, Coventry put themselves forward, didn't they? They were like, "This can be the centre of the country. This can be where the national stadium is," and it was an incredibly ambitious plan to kind of take football, and the FA away from North London and situate it right in the heart of the country.
Well, it was a good idea, James. I to this day, I am fervently believe we didn't need Wembley. I know there are strong arguments on both sides of the fence. We did not need Wembley. Our national team travelling the country took the team to different venues, which I think, rather than keep saying to people from Newcastle and Manchester and various other, "Oh, you've all got to come to London for your big day out." Why? We'll go to you. What they didn't tell us, of course, at that time when we were all pitching to, Manchester did as well, to be the new Wembley, there was that little sentence in the Articles of Association, I think, that if ever there was a new stadium built, it had to be built in the same place. I mean, that would have saved a lot of people a lot of heartache if they'd told us that at the start of the process, including Coventry. But how much of it was intent, how much of it was bluster, we'll never know. Only Brian Richardson knows that.
And I think it goes to the great sort of history of sort of innovation, and you mentioned it and touched on it there. So Jimmy Hill comes in 61. You're in the third division at the time. You have I don't know if it's too early for you, but you go to a run to the quarterfinals of the FA Cup. You have Manchester United and Bobby Charlton at Highfield Road when you're about 5 or 6. He does those things that you say, like pre-match entertainment, pop and crisp parties for young fans, which I'm not sure if you ever went to. Oh, well,
yes,
great.
Of course I did. Of course I was there for all of those. I was there for that quarter-final. I don't think Bob. I did see, and it's a moment of great pride still. Charlton, Law and Best in United jerseys on the same pitch. I think they beat us 3-2 that day. Ian Story Moore got a couple. A player that should have had a career and sadly didn't because of injury, but he just signed for them. He was the star of the show that day. But I did see those guys. I remember that quarter-final and making a mark, and it was great being the new kids on the block. We didn't know what was quite to follow. I don't look back on it thinking, no, we shouldn't have done that. I'm glad we did that.
Wonderful. And then, as you say, you've touched on that game with 50,000 against Wolves, where you win the championship. You're going up to the first division, and Jimmy Hill quits to go to London Weekend Television. You bring in Noel Cantwell, and I want to talk about if you have any memories of the 1968 main stand fire, because something I wasn't aware of when I was doing my research, that there was a sort of a fire that broke out, I think at a reserve game in '68, and 10 days later, you had the stand sort of patched up and scaffolded and 47,000 piled into Highfield Road for the visit of Manchester United. Often I say on this programme that the past is a different country, but I can't imagine that happening nowadays. A fire, some scaffolding, and
Well, it was incredible. It was incredible. I was never got to the bottom of what actually happened. I think it was a reserve game. I think, and there should have been a warning for everybody else with wooden stands. And sadly, look what happened to Bradford in exactly the same way. If it was a lighted cigarette, and if it had dropped beneath the stand, and that caused the fire, there were other theories that it was a timely fire. Because it did lead to us being able to erect a brand new stand on that side. But yeah, they did shut the damaged section, and they did open up for that game. Remarkable, really. I mean, I don't know whether we should applaud them for doing so, or whether we should admonish them for putting lives at risk, if indeed that may or may not have been the case. I don't know. I was too young, but you look at it, wouldn't happen now. It couldn't happen now. There's no way in the world you would leave the stadium, as Coventry have too often in recent years. You'd probably be playing at St Andrews again. But needs must in those days. It required to be done. I can see it now. My biggest concern as a young lad was trawling through the pages of the Coventry Evening Telegraph. What's happened to the title? What's happened to our trophy that we won? We didn't win many trophies. Did it get melted in the fire? Is it okay? As a boy, that was my only concern. Where is that trophy? But yeah, I mean, huge incident that, as I say, fortuitously led to a little bit more of the ground being. Early on, if you think back to the Division 3, I can see pictures of it now from that side across to where they built that sky blue stand in sections. There was just a corner of it in some games. If you look back on some of those matches, just a piece of it that they'd opened in the corner, and then added more as they went down. It was a different world, different era.
Very much so. And where were you sort of standing or sitting at that time? Because it had quite an imposing sort of cop, quite a steeply banked cop. I think the east stand, but certainly when it was still terracing, there was quite a. Were you on the cop, or were you too young to be on the cop then? Or?
No, I was. We always went on that sky blue stand side where they used to have, if you remember, the roof. I think for disabled supporters, and we used to encourage the small blue cars to come into the stadium, and they would sit on that side as well. Those guys. The West End at that time was nothing more than a cowshed cover. I think they bought the cover from Lords or somewhere, which again Brian Richardson went back to many years later when he built those two. He bought there were four corners of Lord's cricket ground, and we bought two of them for hospitality suites because we didn't have any hospitality suites or enough. But I think that's where that original West Stand roof came from the cricket ground. But it was no more than a cowshed really. But that it scared me. I didn't want to go in there with those guys. They were too big and too noisy for me. So I stayed on that sky blue stand side. We did the wooden stand, the tunnel side. I was there that day for a couple of games. I was there that day. Bobby Gould scored, I think, against Colchester United. I think in a 1-0, another big game that we needed to win towards the end of the season. And of course, Gouldy always seemed to score. I mean, what a haul in that season. Sad that he didn't go on and do it later, but I think he had a season when he got injured, and then of course he couldn't say no to Arsenal. I mean, they came with an offer that he had to take, but he remains an ardent Sky Blue. I know that for a fact. As I say, I'm constantly in touch with him. He is my link to that period, and it's fascinating, being able to get into conversation with him, because all of the guys that I watched in those days, George Hudson, Ernie Machin, Ronnie Rees, Brian Hill, Ronnie Farmer, Willie Humphries, Ray Pointer. Pointer points the way to Europe. We got Ray in from Burnley, England centre forward. Wow, title winner. These are guys Bob mixed with. And I did Ian Gibson, Gibbo. And and it's now that I get to talk to Bob and understand more about these characters. What happened? What happened to Ian Gibson? Why there was a period of time when Jimmy just bombed him? I think I'm right in saying, and it's so long now it doesn't matter, that I think Jim caught them in a pub playing cards one Thursday lunchtime, which he didn't necessarily like very much, and then he just bombed Gibbo. I think he was out for weeks. Brought him back for a game, Middlesbrough maybe, scored 2 in a 3-2 win. But it's now that I can with through Bob's experiences get closer to that, and it's a real privilege to be able to do so when I spent so much of my childhood and then subsequently youth drooling over these guys, Coventry. What happened in that stadium. Wonderful.
Yeah, and especially at the time. I mean, you're in, you possibly your most formative years for football, sort of, when you're turning, becoming a teenager, and you are beating a Bayern Munich side containing Franz Beckenbauer and Gerd Müller 2-1 at Highfield Road. I mean, it's a shame you lost the first leg 6-1.
Now you see, if you look at that team, they played their proper team. We'd lost Bill Glazier for the first game. Bill was injured. Now, I'm not saying that Bill would have made significant difference. We weren't clearly good enough. Eric McManus made his debut in our goal. Unfortunately for Eric, it wasn't a great start to life for him. But we did beat them in the return leg, and they did not send, as teams do these days, a reserve 11, if you like. They were all there. They all played. And we did beat them by 2-1. Having triumphed against Trakia Plovdiv by 4-1, John O'Rourke, I think, getting 3 on that particular occasion before we brought them back to Highfield Road and beat them. And that was as a result of the season I mentioned, North Carmel, getting us to a 6th place finish. These things were unheard of. Go back to that 6th. That was always the dream. Help fire Sky Blues into Europe or something, Jimmy said. But you didn't. What was Europe? I mean, I was too young to know what that was, first of all. But when you started to understand it, you didn't think that these things would be possible. I think we won 10 away games that season under Noel. Incredible form.
It's really the sort of high point for the team and possibly even the city, because you're only a few years away from the sort of oil crisis and the decline of the motor trade and things like that. But it must have felt at that time like you were on this inexorable rise, and it was just. Did it feel that? I mean, it might not have, but
yes.
You one day Coventry are going to win, because Derby are winning the league. Why can't Coventry win the league?
Well, that's fair, and yes, it did feel like that. And then for it all to come so abruptly crashing down when Jimmy announced that he was leaving, and I know there are 2 versions of that story, and neither of the guys is sadly with us anymore. But Jim always claims all he wanted was a 10-year contract. Unheard of. Nobody signs 10-year contracts. But that was his plan. Give me a 10-year contract. Derek Robbins, the then chairman, was convinced that Jimmy was already planning to move into television. So that he wasn't in the position to be able to agree to Jim's request. And I'm not sure how much of Jim's request was because he knew it would get rejected and then he'd have a reason to leave. But it was a shattering blow that to consider this guy who, I mean, my formative years, I'd only been around, 5 or 6 years, less than that, but had delivered what he had that was now leaving. It was, wow, the world's ended. What do we do now? Amazing.
You're starting to go on the same journey yourself in terms of in sort of the mid-70s. You're moving away from the city personally for work. You're going into radio. You're going to London, to Manchester, to Liverpool. If your Wikipedia page is correct, you can obviously correct me if any of those are wrong. And then you're moving into television after a stint in radio. How does your relationship with the team sort of change when you're no longer in the city?
Well, just with a reference to the Wikipedia page, it probably is as accurate as we're ever going to get it. But I did have trouble when I'd left Sky in convincing them to leave it alone, because at midnight every day they would change it and look to cause me as much harm as they possibly could in doing so. And in the end, we had to take legal action and come to an agreement that what's there, I think, is vaguely what they find acceptable. But the story of how I left and why they found unacceptable and constantly changed and removed. But that's as an aside. You're the only person that I've ever told that to. but yeah, that's what I suppose I'm saying that because you can't be too sure about Wikipedia pages.
Yeah.
But I think most of mine now is correct, and yeah, you're right. Relationship with the team changed enormously. A lot of them became good friends. Dion Dublin, probably the most, well, him and Cyril, but Dion, probably the best centre forward that ever played for our football club. I can see him now. Once we'd let him go to Villa, and that was there's a story there that it should never have happened. Anyway, I can see him. I'm sitting in the stand on this side. Villa are attacking the West End, and I'm saying to Graham Hover, the club secretary who was next to me, watch Dion, and he's set off from the centre circle. I can see it now, and ball comes in from the right, goal. 1-0 it ends up. Dion Dublin. But great guy, really good guy, really pleased with the success he's had. George Berteng later. George remains a really, really good friend. Good, it's Strack, Richard Shaw, all these guys. Again, they look back on their time playing for Coventry as largely in that arena, and with good memories. It was hard, it was a struggle, but you knew. Look at the night Huckabee got his goals against Manchester United, and we won 3-2. I was on the air then.
Yeah.
I was on the air presenting a programme at Sky. I think we're going to a live game, a kickoff, and I'm trying to get to it. As I keep hearing in my ear, it's just gone 2-2, and I was just gone 2-2, and Huckabee scored again. It's 3-2. What? This is more exciting than going to the match. But yeah, the guys, when you get grown up, it is different. I've been enormously privileged from a very young age to have been around it and be part of it at a distance, but to have been able to touch some of it. Brian Richardson was very generous during his time as chairman to me. Mike McGinnity, who became a very, very good friend, who oversaw the move in the end from Highfield Road to the new arena. I think were he with us, he would have to admit with a whole lot of regrets, because the deal, sadly, Mike ended up doing wasn't very good for the football club. And Sisu, wow, as I say, the wasted 10 years. But although it had to be done, the leaving could and should have been done a whole lot better than it was. What we ended up with was never going to be conducive to a successful football club. In fact, you could argue it ended up being part of the reason that we got into so much trouble.
It's sort of a wonderful venue for a concert, the new arena. Because it's very convenient. It's you can get there. There's lots of good motorway access. It feels, to go to a concert there is quite a good, enjoyable experience. Springsteen's played there. They've had some really, really big acts. But to go to a game there, it's hard to put your finger on it. And this isn't a podcast that's anti-new stadiums. We've talked really positively about Brighton and the Amex and Tottenham Hotspur's new stadium. There's a role for everything, but it's never quite felt like home to Coventry, and maybe that's because occasionally you get kicked out of it to go to play at Northampton or Birmingham.
But I think you need, James. Yeah, I think there is that, and I hear what you're saying about. Look, there was initially the train station wasn't there, and that was always envisaged it should be. That didn't happen. The ownership, as I've mentioned, it should have been retained by Coventry. That didn't happen. And subsequently, Wasps turning up to nick it from under our noses. And listen, Mike Ashley's. I have no problems with Mike Ashley owning it. Gary Hoffman, who's chairman, I think, of the arena now, a good mate of mine. I think he's only done good things. I think what the stadium needs is what West Ham got last season under Moisey: some big nights. Some nights that you can then associate with, like that Coventry Wolves match that I still remember. It needs, a home game against Maidstone is an enticing idea, and hopefully we get back to having a reputation for maybe doing some damage in the cup. I think the last time that was '87, but it needs some big games. It needs some big moments. It needs some big drama and crowds to go with it. And I've always said, as far as the new arena was concerned, I must have tried 3-4 times with different people, different consortia to get them to buy the club over the last 15 years. Because I always said, oh, look at the crowds, 12, 16s, 14s. I always said, no, if you deliver Coventry fans something to get excited about, and I've witnessed it, they will come out and support you. What they got fed up with was a whole lot of broken promises, a whole lot of not even near enough, not good enough is what we had to put up with, and a succession of people toing and froing, telling lies, and ending up in League Two, and that's not conducive to bringing people out to support you. But I've seen it now, big games, 26ers, 28s. It just needs something now for us to be able to latch up. Promotion. I mean, how close were we last year?
Yeah.
Penalty kick away. But I think I look at the supporters now who travel. Unbelievable, fantastic support. They deserve what I had and experienced. They deserve more of what it is Mark Robins appears to be able to get them close to. I hope that continues to happen. And then they can. If it doesn't feel like home, it will then. It will then. And I get what you're saying about it. I understand that totally. That it's an argument. It's too big. Certainly too big for what we've needed it for. If we got back in the Premier League, it would be just about right. And that was what it was always envisaged to be. But
I think that makes a lot of sense in terms of you need those memories, you need those touch points where you to kind of to enthuse you, a team about the new stadium, and Coventry needs to be in the Premier League for that really to happen, doesn't it? As you mentioned, one penalty kick away, and Luton, they have all right, it's a difficult season for them, but what wouldn't you give for a difficult season in the Premier League?
Well, I agree. Of the three that came up last year, I said before the season started, after seeing them play us, I thought there was something about them. First of all, I've no problem with Luton beating us. What they went through was far worse than what we did. That 30-point penalty that saw them relegated out of the Football League, 2 playoff finals lost. Finally, they get themselves back. 13 years later, they're in the Premier League. Good luck to them. But there's something about them. There's some spirit that I think might keep them in the Premier League. But having said that, if they don't stay, who wouldn't take 100 mil for a season of heartache? But probably some memories to go with it, and then go again. I didn't when we were relegated from League One. I genuinely at that point only thought there was one way. I thought we were going where Luton had been. For Mark Robins to have done what he has is incredible under the constraints that he's operated under. Incredible. Never gets a mention when big jobs come up. Thank goodness. But I would like to see him, for his own personal reasons, get a club. But I'm contradicting myself now by saying, God, no, don't. We'd miss him enormously. I'd like to see him more fulfill the dream and get to the Premier League with us. But it's been a hell of a ride, and Highfield, maybe they should have a party on that centre circle that's now in the middle of that housing estate. When they get back, somebody should go down there and pop a bottle of champagne and have a drink. And that those round tiles, I think they are the centre circle that was once there, aren't they? That would be right.
There is a small memorial to where it used, the centre circle used to be. Touching on the Premier League, I wonder, do you remember your first game for Sky at Highfield Road?
Wow.
Because I do. I don't remember it, but I've got it. If you can't pull it, I've got it, because there's some fascinating details about it.
No, I can't pull it.
It's a Monday night football. Coventry beat Spurs 1-0.
Williams.
Yes. And much more importantly, the halftime entertainment was Sonia.
Yes, I do remember it. Yeah, poor girl. Oh no. Poor girl. She was terrific, but I don't think it was us, but she got roundly booed off somewhere. I think where she'd gone to provide entertainment, and oh no, that was so embarrassing. But yeah, I do now remember that game. Yeah, I didn't realise it was that one. There's a side story because our commentator was a guy called Ian Dark, and it wasn't a great game. And he delivered a phrase during the course of it that he thought that what we were watching was approaching mind-boggling mediocrity. That was it, mind-boggling mediocrity. And our producer, a guy called Andy Melvin, pulled him a couple of days later. Even I was hurt by that. You know, clubs like Coventry can't provide the entertainment that Uniteds and Arsenals and others do. We were doing our best. And he pulled Ian and he said, listen, I don't ever want to hear you pass comment like that on a football match ever again. We're selling the game. That was our job in those days. Yeah. We're selling it.
Spent a lot on it.
Yeah. And Ian said, well, what about my credibility? Melvin said, that's extraordinary. But I said, you haven't got any, and walked off.
Oh, wow. Wow.
But in a way, I saw that as, well, yeah, have a go at my team.
Yeah, it makes sense from a marketing point of view. You don't want to be telling your audience what they're paying. What they're paying, I think it was £15 a month at that time. It seems like a bargain now, but £15 a month in 1992 to watch the football, and the commentators telling you it's rubbish. I get it.
I used to get criticised for trying to sell, and it wasn't so. What the view we took was, if it's bad as that was, and it wasn't a great game, it was bad. People will work that out for themselves. It's not our job to tell them. What we should be doing is trying to find a way to ask questions as I used to. How does this get better? What have we got to do for these two teams to put on something here that's approaching something we might get excited by? That was the job then. So for Darky to go 2-footed, harsh on my team.
And so that's potentially one of the lowlights of of broadcasting at Highfield Road. Do you have any favourite games from when you, as a broadcaster there, any nights or afternoons that you fondly remember there?
Our studio was always noisy. It was our dressing room. I've always said that. Subsequently later, they turned the atmosphere on us that we used to generate in there. But I remember a night when United came. Paul Stretford, my mate, Andy Cole's agent, was in the studio with us, and we were. I think we were 1 down, 1-1, 2-1. Then we got back to 2-2, and it just seemed like Cole. Every time we got somewhere near a point, Coley would score again. And I remember that was a really riotous night. Good night. The Blackburn game you mentioned, I used to go as often as I could. If I'd done a game and it was within striking distance. I'd often take Jeff Shreves with me, our reporter, and Graham would look after us. That although the result of that United game didn't go for us, there was another. I think I can't remember the match, but Jimmy Hill was a guest. Jimmy came on the programme as a guest, and that was an enormous high for me, because he's someone that I held in such high regard, high esteem. He was a broadcast hero of mine, and he was a footballing hero. And those two things combined to find myself hosting a programme that he was guest on, Jimmy Hill, was a wow moment for me. I mean, it was, you sit there and think, well, it doesn't, at Coventry, Highfield Road, it doesn't get any better than this. So that was special.
I wanted to touch on, perhaps finally, I don't know if it will be, but I definitely wanted to touch on Coventry as sort of the experts on final day survival, which seemed to be the sort of MO for a while. There's the famous last day shenanigans in '77 where Jimmy Hill delays the game to find out this.
No,
does he not?
Absolutely not.
Oh.
No. That game was delayed on police advice. There were security issues outside the stadium. It meant that
a friendly policeman?
Well, that may be. That may be. But there was a full investigation conducted into that by Graham Kelly and the Football Association, and Jimmy and Coventry were found not guilty of many charges. I do have a story associated with it that I'll tell you in a minute, I interrupted you. I'm sorry. I understand entirely what you're referring to.
Yeah, and it's fine. You're here to defend the honour of your club. I think the statute of limitations has gone though, so you don't need to worry about that too much. There's Everton in the mid-80s.
Yeah.
There's others as well. Do any of them sort of stand out, or sort of was there any time where you thought we're going here?
Yeah, every time. I mean, there was worse. I think we got done on the last day, as did Notts County. If they'd won, they would have. I think we got done. It might have been by Villa. Can't remember. But we both lost on the final day, which meant they went down. If they'd won, we would have gone down. By the way, I think looking back, if we had gone once or twice, it might have been to the benefit of the club rather than just always hang on. The game you're talking about, I remember very well. Due to issues outside the stadium with late arrivals, the police suggested that we kick off 15 minutes after Sunderland had started at Everton. Now, when the result came through that they had lost, it meant that we and Bristol City, of course, were both safe if we got a point each. Bristol City, coincidentally managed by Alan Dix, who was Jimmy's assistant when we got promotion. His assistant was John Sillett, who was our right fullback during those years as well. So the two clubs knew each other fairly well. If I'm not mistaken, Tommy Hutch had got us 2 up. And then Bristol City staged a storming comeback. Now, as a public service, Jimmy announced the score from Goodison. No, you're laughing. As a public service, Jimmy announced the score from Goodison over the PA system. And it was very evident to both teams, both coaches, that 2-2 would do. We were both staying up if that was the case. Now, that's just a side benefit. It was not intended for that message to be delivered. But sometimes, and I know I'm
Do you
sorry,
believe this, Richard? Do you actually believe
no,
this?
I don't. If there are Sunderland fans watching, this, I apologise because it's still contentious, and it's the reason that we don't like each other now, the two clubs. But sometime later, I was presenting we used to call it the Footballers' Football Show, and it was a chat show. We did it on a Tuesday night, in effect live. It was recorded, but it was so late to the broadcast time it was going out. There's no time to stop, change anything or anything. It just went out as it was. Terry Yorath was a guest, and we were talking about this period. And he said there were two things. One, Bristol City put a sub on late. Some kid came on and he went, dropped his shoulder, bang, ball hits the bar. And everybody freezes and turns to the benches as if to say, hey, have you not told him? So there was that. And Terry said after the game, Jimmy came into the dressing room and said, well, listen, well done, lads. Great. And he put a brown paper bag on the massage table, and all the boys went, wow, goodies, money. They looked in the bag and they found it was sandwiches. But that Terry's admission, or Terry's version of events, I'm standing by mine. I'm standing by the honour of Jimmy Hill and police instruction. Terry's version of events led Graham Kelly, who was then the chief executive of the FA, saw him sometime later, and he went, I saw that programme. Oh, did you? He went, yeah. Interesting, wasn't it? I said, fascinating, Graham. Fascinating. He said, I did think about reopening the investigation into what had happened. Probably better just to let things lie, though.
Yeah, and hopefully the policeman's brown bag only contains sandwiches as well.
But yeah, it's not. If you're a Sunderland fan, it's not good. As I say, I reiterate my apology. But these things happen. There are many others. Gary Leeds came when Big Ron was in charge, and we were going to sign Gary McAllister during the summer, and some of us knew and some didn't. 89 minutes, balls on the edge of the box at the West End. 9 times out of 10, Macca scores. He did when he came back with Liverpool at the other end. This one, he bent into Rose Ed. We got the 0-0 and stayed up. The 3 games at the end of a season we had to win. Stoke was 1. Everton was that last one at home. Don Mackay in charge. That was ridiculous. We had to win 3 games, and they were all played beyond the end of the season. Everyone else was done. We had to win them. We did. I don't know anything about that. I can't tell you any stories. Maybe that was just coincidence. Everton were champions. They left Andy Gray and Peter Reid out. Otherwise, they turned up with their full team. We beat them 4-1. But they were Tottenham. Tottenham away. It wasn't obviously a Highfield Road game, but Tottenham away. Williams and was it Williams and Dion? I think it was. Incredible. And Brian Richardson wandering into the dressing room this time with a case of champagne that he put into his boot because he just knew, he said, that we were going to be okay. And he put the champagne in the dressing room and said, "Go on, boys, have a drink." But yeah, those last days, they were nerve tinglers. I went to Villa when we finally went down. Villa fans like to think they put us down. They didn't. We were already down. A Derby win at Old Trafford. Jim Smith and Derby had won at Old Trafford the previous week. That put us down. We did have some hope. Hadji got a couple, and I think we were 2 up. Merson scores the third in the 3-2, which he's never let me forget. So I was there to see us go. I would like to be there to see us get back. I wanted to go to Wembley last year, and I couldn't get out of responsibilities here. But I would like to be there whenever we get back.
Yeah, well, that was going to be my final question in terms of how often do you still get to go? Because obviously you're quite committed with the with the day job covering all the Premier League, and then so when was the last time you got to go?
Last time I went was the occasion we first went back. Gary took me, Gary Hoffman. It was a virtual sellout, I think, when we returned from Northampton. Which was too long ago, I know. But I am an ardent watcher of City Unseen on YouTube. Mark Robins' press conferences, I am sad enough to sit and watch those, both pre and post game. First thing I do when I come back on a Saturday is go online and see the goals. You can take the boy out of Coventry, but I'm afraid you will never take Coventry out of the boy. It's my team. Great memories with my dad, so you can't change that. I'd like to go more often, but that would require me to be back in the UK. And at the moment, happily, there's not too much sign of that. They seem to be quite pleased with what I do here, so here it is.
Well, you've certainly got the better weather. We're talking in February, and I can see the sun shining into your front room.
It's gorgeous out there. 24 degrees. The weather at this time of the year is sensational. I would have sat out there, but there's roadworks going on, and it's a bit noisy.
Well, I don't want to deprive you of that vital vitamin D. So, Richard, thank you very much for sharing your memories of Highfield Road. I found them fascinating, and thank you for joining us on the Grand Jules.
Been an absolute pleasure, my friend, and thank you for asking.
That was Richard Keys, all the way from Qatar. So Richard Keys on Highfield Road. I found that fascinating. Yeah, it's such an interesting ground. I didn't know that Coventry played in Europe against Bayern Munich, and one of the bits that I found in my research of Highfield Road, which I wasn't able to get into the chat with Richard, was Highfield Road was the ground where Eusebio scored his last international goal against Northern Ireland, when Northern Ireland were having to play their games away from Belfast during the Troubles. They played one against Portugal at Highfield Road, and that's where Eusebio scored his last international goal. We're talking about Coventry being in the FA Cup semi-finals. It's also hosted one FA Cup semi-final in 1980 between Liverpool and Arsenal. It's like a second replay or something like that. I think they'd had 2 games at Villa Park, and then I don't know if it's the pitch couldn't handle it, or I don't know why. But then the second replay was at Highfield Road. So yeah, that all ties into what we're talking about now. And I should be clear as well. That chat was recorded in February. That was before Coventry had got to the semi-finals. So there wasn't any explicit reference of them being in the FA Cup semi-finals. I think he might have mentioned the game against Maidstone that they were scheduled to play. But it's obviously a great time to be a Coventry fan. They've got United in the semi-finals, and yeah, who knows? Certainly a lot of opportunity for Richard to bang the drum for King Mark, as he referred to him, and the job that Mark Robins has done at Coventry City, with obviously Mark Robins' pedigree with Manchester United and the FA Cup and Ferguson 1990 and all that. Next week, I don't know what to do. We could go football again. We've got some really interesting football ones lined up. It is also the start of the cricket season, so maybe we should drop a cricket one in. I'm not sure. Let me know your thoughts. Would you like to stick on the football track, or would you be up for hearing a little bit of cricket? We'll see what happens. I'll see you next time.